This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Gitu Milwani. 3 Men in a Boat by Jerome K.Jerome. Chapter 1, including 3 Invalids, Sufferings of George and Harris, a Victim to 107 Fatal Maladies, Useful Prescriptions, Cure for Liver Complaint in Children. We agree that we are overworked and need rest. A week on the rolling deep. George suggests the river. Montmorency lodges an objection. Original motion carried by majority of 3 to 1. There were 4 of us, George and William Samuel Harris and myself and Montmorency. We were sitting in my room smoking and talking about how bad we were. Bad from a medical point of view, I mean, of course. We were all feeling seedy, and we were getting quite nervous about it. Harris said he felt such extraordinary fits of giddiness come over him at times that he hardly knew what he was doing. And then George said that he had fits of giddiness too, and hardly knew what he was doing. With me, it was my liver that was out of order. I knew it was my liver that was out of order because I had just been reading a patent liver pill circular in which were detailed the various symptoms by which a man could tell when his liver was out of order. I had them all. It is a most extraordinary thing, but I never read a patent medicine advertisement without being impelled to the conclusion that I am suffering from the particular disease therein dealt with in its most virulent form. The diagnosis seems in every case to correspond exactly with all the sensations that I have ever felt. I remember going to the British Museum one day to read up the treatment for some slight ailment, of which I had a touch. Hay fever, I fancy it was. I got down the book and read all I came to read, and then, in an unthinking moment, I idly turned the leaves, and began to indolently study diseases generally. I forget which was the first distemper I plunged into, some fearful, devastating scourge, I know, and before I had glanced down half the list of premonitory symptoms, it was borne in upon me that I had fairly got it. I sat for a while, frozen with horror, and then, in a listlessness of despair, I again turned over the pages. I came to typhoid fever. Read the symptoms, discovered I had typhoid fever. Must have had it for months without knowing it. Wondered what else I got. Turned up St. Vitrus dance. Found, as I expected, that I had that too. Began to get interested in my case, and determined to sift it to the bottom, and so started alphabetically. Reading up ague, and learned I was sickening for it, and that the acute stage would commence in about another fortnight. Bright's disease, I was relieved to find, I had only in a modified form, and so far as that was concerned, I might live for years. Cholera I had with severe complications, and diphtheria I seemed to have been born with. I plodded conscientiously through 26 letters, and the only malady I could conclude I had not got was housemaid's knee. I felt rather hurt about this at first. It seemed somehow to be a sort of slight. Why hadn't I got housemaid's knee? Why this invidious reservation? After a while, however, less grasping feelings prevailed. I reflected that I had every other known malady in the pharmacology, and I grew less selfish and determined to do without housemaid's knee. Gout, in its most malignant stage, it would appear, had seized me without my being aware of it. And zymosis I had evidently been suffering with from boyhood. There were no more diseases after zymosis, so I concluded there was nothing else the matter with me. I sat and pondered. I thought, what an interesting case I must be from a medical point of view. What an acquisition I should be to a class. Students would have no need to walk the hospitals if they had me. I was a hospital in myself. All they need do would be to walk around me, and after that, take the diploma. Then I wondered how long I had to live. I tried to examine myself. I felt my pulse. I could not at first feel any pulse at all. And then, all of a sudden, it seemed to start off. I pulled out my watch and timed it. I made it 147 to the minute. I tried to feel my heart. I could not feel my heart. It had stopped beating. I have since been induced to come to the opinion that it must have been there all the time and must have been beating, but I cannot account for it. I patted myself all over my front, from what I call my waist up to my head, and I went a bit round each side and a little way up the back, but I could not feel or hear anything. I tried to look at my tongue. I stuck it out as far as ever it would go, and I shut one eye and tried to examine it with the other. I could only see the tip, and the only thing that I could gain from that was to feel more certain than before that I had scarlet fever. I had walked into that reading room a happy, healthy man. I crawled out a decrepit wreck. I went to my medical man. He's an old chum of mine and feels my pulse and looks at my tongue and talks about the weather all for nothing when I fancy I'm ill. So I thought I would do him a good turn by going to him now. What a doctor wants, I said, is practice. He shall have me. He will get more practice out of me than out of 1,700 of your ordinary commonplace patients with only 1 or 2 diseases each. So I went straight up and saw him, and he said, "Well, what's the matter with you?" I said, "I will not take up your time, dear boy, with telling you what is the matter with me. Life is brief, and you might pass away before I had finished. But I will tell you what is not the matter with me. I have not got housemaid's knee. Why I have not got housemaid's knee I cannot tell you, but the fact remains that I have not got it. Everything else, however, I have got." And I told him how I had come to discover it all. Then he opened me and looked down me and clutched hold of my wrist, and then he hit me over the chest when I wasn't expecting it. A cowardly thing to do, I call it. And immediately afterwards butted me with the side of his head. After that, he sat down and wrote out a prescription, and folded it up and gave it to me, and I put it in my pocket and went out. I did not open it. I went to the nearest chemist and handed it in. The man read it and handed it back. He said he didn't keep it. I said, "You are a chemist?" He said, "I am a chemist. If I was a cooperative store and a family hotel combined, I might be able to oblige you, but being only a chemist hampers me." I read the prescription. It ran, 1 pound beefsteak with 1 pint bitter beer every 6 hours. 1 10-mile walk every morning. 1 bed at 11 sharp every night. And don't stuff up your head with things you do not understand. I followed the directions, with the happy result, speaking for myself, that my life was preserved and is still going on. In the present instance, going back to the liver pill circular, I had the symptoms beyond all mistake, the chief among them being a general disinclination to work of any kind. What I suffered in that way no tongue can tell. From my earliest infancy I had been a martyr to it. As a boy, the disease hardly ever left me for a day. They did not know then that it was my liver. Medical science was in a far less advanced state than now, and they used to put it down to laziness. "Why, you skulking little devil, you," they would say, "get up and do something for your living, can't you?" Not knowing, of course, that I was ill. And they didn't give me pills. They gave me clumps on the side of the head. And strange as it may appear, those clumps on the head often cured me, for the time being. I have known one clump on the head to have more effect upon my liver, and make me feel more anxious to go straight away there and then, and do what was wanted to be done without further loss of time, than a whole box of pills does now. You know, it often is so. Those simple old-fashioned remedies are sometimes more efficacious than all the dispensary stuff. We sat there for half an hour, describing to each other our maladies. I explained to George and William Harris how I felt when I got up in the morning, and William Harris told us how he felt when he went to bed, and George stood on the hearth-rug and gave us a clever and powerful piece of acting, illustrative of how he felt in the night. George fancies he is ill, but there's never anything really the matter with him, you know. At this point, Mrs. Puppets knocked at the door to know if we were ready for supper. We smiled sadly at one another and said we supposed we had better try to swallow a bit. Harris said a little something in one's stomach often kept the disease in check. And Mrs. Poppet brought the tray in, and we drew up to the table and toyed with a little steak and onions and some rhubarb tart. I must have been very weak at the time, because I know that after the first half an hour or so I seemed to take no interest whatever in my food, an unusual thing for me, and I didn't want any cheese. This duty done, we refilled our glasses, lit our pipes, and resumed the discussion upon our state of health. What it was that was actually the matter with us, we none of us could be sure of, but the unanimous opinion was that it, whatever it was, had been brought on by overwork. "What we want is rest," said Harris. "Rest and complete change," said George. "The overstrain upon our brains has produced a general depression throughout the system. Change of scene, and absence of the necessity for thought will restore the mental equilibrium." George has a cousin who is usually described in the charge sheet as a medical student, so that he naturally has a somewhat family physicianary way of putting things. I agreed with George and suggested that we should seek out some retired and old-world spot, far from the maddening crowd, and dream away a sunny week among its drowsy lanes, some half-forgotten nook, hidden away by the fairies, out of reach of the noisy world, some quaint perched eyrie on the cliffs of time, from whence the surging waves of the 19th century would sound far off and faint. Harris said he thought it would be humpy. He said he knew the sort of place I meant, where everybody went to bed at 8 o'clock, and you couldn't get a referee for love or money, and had to walk 10 miles to get your baccy. "No," said Harris. "If you want rest and change, you can't beat a sea trip." I objected to the sea trip strongly. A sea trip does you good when you are going to have a couple of months of it, but for a week it is wicked. You start on Monday with the idea implanted in your bosom that you are going to enjoy yourself. You wave an airy adieu to the boys on shore, light your biggest pipe, and swagger about the decks as if you were Captain Hook, Sir Francis Drake, and Christopher Columbus all rolled into one. On Tuesday you wish you hadn't come. On Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday you wish you were dead. On Saturday you are able to swallow a little beef tea, and to sit up on deck and answer with a wan, sweet smile when kind-hearted people ask you how you feel now. On Sunday you begin to walk about again, and to take solid food. And on Monday morning, as with your bag and umbrella in your hand you stand by the gunwale, waiting to step ashore, you begin to thoroughly like it. I remember my brother-in-law going for a short sea trip once for the benefit of his health. He took a return berth from London to Liverpool, and when he got to Liverpool, the only thing he was anxious about was to sell that return ticket. It was offered around the town at a tremendous reduction, so I am told, and eventually sold for 18 pence to a bilious-looking youth who had just been advised by his medical men to go to the seaside and take exercise. "Seaside," said my brother-in-law, pressing the ticket affectionately into his hand. "Why, you'll have enough to last you a lifetime. And as for exercise, why, you'll get more exercise sitting down on that ship than you would turning somersaults on dry land." He himself, my brother-in-law, came back by train. He said the North Western Railway was healthy enough for him. Another fellow I knew went for a week's voyage around the coast, and before they started, the steward came to him to ask whether he would pay for each meal as he had it, or arrange beforehand for the whole series. The steward recommended the latter course, as it would come to so much cheaper. He said they would do him for the whole week at £2.5. He said for breakfast there would be fish, followed by a grill. Lunch was at 1 and consisted of 4 courses. Dinner at 6, soup, fish, entree, joint, poultry, salad, sweets, cheese, and dessert. and a light meat supper at 10. My friend thought he would close on the 2-pound-5 job. He is a hearty eater, and did so. Lunch came just as they were off Sheerness. He didn't feel so hungry as he thought he should, and contented himself with a bit of boiled beef and some strawberries and cream. He pondered a great deal during the afternoon, and at one time it seemed to him that he had been eating nothing but boiled beef for weeks, and at other times it seemed he must have been living on strawberries and cream for years. Neither the beef nor the strawberries and cream seemed happy either, somewhat discontent-like. At 6 they came and told him dinner was ready. The announcement aroused no enthusiasm within him, but he felt there must be some of that 2-pound-5 to be worked off, and he held on to ropes and things and went down. A pleasant odour of onions and hot ham, mingled with fried fish and greens, greeted him at the bottom of the ladder, and then the steward came up with an oily smile and said, "What can I get you, sir?" "Get me out of this," was the feeble reply, and they ran him up quick and propped him up over to leeward and left him. For the next 4 days he lived a simple and blameless life on thin captain's biscuits. I mean the biscuits were thin, not the captain, and soda water. But towards Saturday he got uppish and went in for weak tea and dry toast, and on Monday he was gorging himself on chicken broth. He left the ship on Tuesday, and as it steamed away from the landing stage, he gazed after it regretfully. "There she goes," he said. "There she goes with 2 pounds worth of food on board that belongs to me and that I haven't had." He said that if they had given him another day, he thought he could have put it straight. So I put my face against the sea trip. Not, as I explained, upon my own account. I was never queer, but I was afraid for George. George said he should be all right, and would rather like it, but he would advise Harris and me not to think of it, as he felt sure we would both be ill. Harris said that, to himself, it was always a mystery how people managed to get sick at sea. Said he thought people must do it on purpose, from affectation. Said he had often wished to be, but had never been able. And then he told us anecdotes of how he had gone across the channel when it was so rough that the passengers had to be tied into their berths, and he and the captain were the only 2 living souls on board who were not ill. Sometimes it was he and the second mate who were not ill, but it was generally he and one other man. If not he and another man, then it was he by himself. It is a curious fact, but no one ever is seasick on land. At sea you come across plenty of people very bad indeed, whole boatloads of them, but I have never met a man yet on land who has ever known at all what it was to be seasick. Where the thousands upon thousands of bad sailors that swarm in every ship hide themselves when they are on land is a mystery. If most men were like a fellow I saw on the Yarmouth boat one day, I could account for the seeming enigma easily enough. It was just off Southern Pier, I recollect, and he was leaning out through one of the portholes in a very dangerous position. I went up to him to try and save him. "Hi, come on further in," I said, shaking him by the shoulder. "You'll be overboard." "Oh my, I wish I was the only answer I could get, and there I had to leave him. 3 weeks afterwards I met him in the coffee-room of a Bath hotel, talking about his voyages and explaining with enthusiasm how he loved the sea. "Good sailor," he replied in answer to a young man's envious query. "Well, I did feel a little queer once, I confess. It was off Cape Horn. The vessel was wrecked the next morning." I said, "Weren't you a little shaky by Southern Pier one day and wanted to be thrown overboard?" "Southern Pier?" he replied with a puzzled expression. "Yes, going down to Yarmouth last Friday 3 weeks. Yes, he replied, brightening up. "I remember now. I did have a headache that afternoon. It was the pickles, you know. They were the most disgraceful pickles I had ever tasted in a respectable boat. Did you have any?" For myself, I have discovered an excellent preventive against seasickness in balancing myself. You stand in the center of the deck, and as the ship heaves and pitches, you move your body about so as to keep it always straight. When the front of the ship rises, you lean forward until the deck almost touches your nose, and when its back end gets up, you lean backwards. This is all very well for an hour or two, but you can't balance yourself for a week. George said, "Let's go up the river." He said we should have fresh air, exercise, and quiet. The constant change of scenery would occupy our minds, including what there was of Harris's, and the hard work would give us a good appetite and make us sleep well. Harris said he didn't think George ought to be doing anything that would have a tendency to make him sleepier than he always was, as it might be dangerous. He said he didn't very well understand how George was going to sleep any more than he did now, seeing that there were only 24 hours in each day, summer and winter alike, but thought that if he did sleep any more, he might just as well be dead, and so save his board and lodging. Harris said, however, that the river would suit him to a T. I don't know what a tea is, except a 6-penny one, which includes bread and butter and cake ad lib, and is cheap for the price if you haven't had any dinner. It seemed to suit everybody, however, which is greatly to its credit. It suited me to a T, too, and Harris and I both said it was a good idea of George's. We said it in a tone that seemed to somehow imply that we were surprised that George should have come out so sensible. The only one who was not struck with the suggestion was Montmorency. He never did care for the river, did Montmorency? "It's all very well for you fellows," he says. "You like it, but I don't. There's nothing for me to do. Scenery is not in my line, and I don't smoke. If I see a rat, you won't stop, and if I go to sleep, you get fooling about with the boat and slop me overboard. If you ask me, I call this whole thing bally foolishness." We were 3-1, however, and the motion was carried.
Chapter 2. Plans discussed. Pleasures of camping out on fine nights. Ditto wet nights. Compromise decided on. Montmorency first impressions of. Fears lest he is too good for this world. Fears subsequently dismissed as groundless. Meeting adjourns. We pulled out the maps and discussed plans. We arranged to start on the following Saturday from Kingston. Harris and I would go down in the morning and take the boat up to Chertsey, and George, who would not be able to get away from the city till the afternoon — George goes to sleep at a bank from 10 to 4 each day, except Saturdays, when they wake him and put him outside at 2 — would meet us there. Should we camp out or sleep at inns? George and I were for camping out. We said it would be so wild and free, so patriarchal-like. Slowly the golden memory of the dead sun fades from the hearts of the cold, sad clouds. Silent, like sorrowing children, the birds have ceased their song, and only the moorhen's plaintive cry and the harsh croak of the corncrack stirs the awed hush around the couch of waters, where the dying day breathes out her last. From the dim woods on either bank, night's ghostly army, the grey shadows, creep out with noiseless treads to chase away the lingering rear-guard of the light, and pass with noiseless unseen feet above the waving river-grass, and through the sighing rushes, and night, upon her sombre throne, folds her black wings above the darkening world, and from her phantom palace, lit by the pale stars, reigns in stillness. Then we run our little boat into some quiet nook, and the tent is pitched, and the frugal supper cooked and eaten. Then the big pipes are filled and lighted, and the pleasant chat goes round in musical undertone, while, in the pauses of our talk, the river, playing round the boat, prattles strange old tales and secrets, sings low the old child's song that it has sung so many thousand years, will sing so many thousand years to come, before its voice grows harsh and old. A song that we, who have learnt to love its changing face, who have so often nestled on its yielding bosom, think somehow we understand, though we could not tell you in mere words the story that we listen to. And we sit there by its margin while the moon, who loves it too, stoops down to kiss it with a sister's kiss, and throws her silver arms around it clingingly, and we watch it as it flows, ever singing, ever whispering, out to meet its king, the sea, till our voices die away in silence, and the pipes go out, till we, commonplace, everyday young men enough, feel strangely full of thoughts, half sad, half sweet, and do not care or want to speak, till we laugh, and rising, knock the ashes from our burnt-out pipes, and say, "Good night," and lulled by the lapping water and the rustling trees, we fall asleep beneath the great still stars, and dream that the world is young again. Young and sweet as she used to be ere the centuries of fret and care had furrowed her fair face, ere her children's sins and follies had made old her loving heart. Sweet as she was in those bygone days, when a new-made mother she nursed us, her children, upon her own deep breast, ere the wiles of painted civilization had lured us away from her fond arms, and the poisoned sneers of artificiality had made us ashamed of the simple life we led with her, and the simple, stately home where mankind was born so many thousand years ago. Harris said, "How about when it rained?" You can never rouse Harris. There is no poetry about Harris, no wild yearning for the unattainable. Harris never weeps he knows not why. If Harris's eyes fill with tears, you can bet it is because Harris has been eating raw onions, or has put too much Worcester over his chop. If you were to stand at night by the seashore with Harris and say, "Hark, do you not hear? It is but the mermaids singing deep below the waving waters, or sad spirits chanting dirges for white corpses held by seaweed," Harris would take you by the arm and say, "I know what it is, old man. You've got a chill. Now you come along with me. I know a place round the corner here where you can get a drop of the finest Scotch whiskey you ever tasted. Put you right in less than no time." Harris always does know a place round the corner where you can get something brilliant in the drinking line. I believe that if you met Harris up in Paradise, supposing such a thing likely, he would immediately greet you with, "So glad you've come, old fellow. I've found a nice place round the corner here where you can get some really first-class nectar." In the present instance, however, as regarded the camping out, his practical view of the matter came as a very timely hint. Camping out in rainy weather is not pleasant. It is evening. You are wet through, and there is a good 2 inches of water in the boat, and all the things are damp. You find a place on the banks that is not quite so puddly as other places you have seen, and you land and lug out the tent, and 2 of you proceed to fix it. It is soaked and heavy, and it flops about and tumbles down on you, and clings around your head and makes you mad. The rain is pouring steadily down all the time. It is difficult enough to fix a tent in dry weather. In wet, the task becomes Herculean. Instead of helping you, it seems to you that the other man is simply playing the fool. Just as you get your side beautifully fixed, he gives it a hoist from his end and spoils it all. "Here, what are you up to?" you call out. "What are you up to?" he retorts. "Let go, can't you?" "Don't pull it. You got it all wrong, you stupid ass," you shout. "No, I haven't," he yells back. "Let go your side." "I tell you, you've got it all wrong," you roar, wishing that you could get at him, and you give your ropes a lug that pulls all his pegs out. "Ah, the bally idiot," you hear him mutter to himself, and then comes a savage haul, and away goes your side. You lay down the mallet and start to go round and tell him what you think about the whole business, and at the same time he starts round in the same direction to come and explain his views to you, and you follow each other round and round, swearing at one another, until the tent tumbles down in a heap and leaves you looking at each other across its ruins, when you both indignantly exclaim in the same breath, "There you are! What did I tell you?" Meanwhile, the third man, who has been bailing out the boat, and who has spilled the water down his sleeve, and has been cursing away to himself steadily for the last 10 minutes, wants to know what the thundering blazes you're playing at, and why the blarmed tent isn't up yet. At last, somehow or other, it does get up, and you land the things. It is hopeless attempting to make a wood fire, so you light the methylated spirit stove, and crowd around it. Rainwater is the chief article of diet at supper. The bread is 2/3 rainwater, the beefsteak pie is exceedingly rich in it, and the jam and the butter and the salt and the coffee have all combined with it to make soup. After supper, you find your tobacco is damp, and you cannot smoke. Luckily, you have a bottle of the stuff that cheers and inebriates, if taken in proper quantities, and this restores to you sufficient interest in life to induce you to go to bed. There you dream that an elephant has suddenly sat down on your chest, and that the volcano has exploded and thrown you down to the bottom of the sea, the elephant still sleeping peacefully on your bosom. You wake up and grasp the idea that something terrible really has happened. Your first impression is that the end of the world has come, and then you think that this cannot be, and that it is thieves and murderers, or else fire, and this opinion you express in the usual method. No help comes, however, and all you know is that thousands of people are kicking you, and you are being smothered. Somebody else seems in trouble too. You can hear his faint cries coming from underneath your bed. Determining, at all events, to sell your life dearly, you struggle frantically, hitting out right and left with arms and legs, and yelling lustily the while. And at last something gives way, and you find your head in the fresh air. 2 feet off you dimly observe a half-dressed ruffian waiting to kill you, and you are preparing for a life-and-death struggle with him, when it begins to dawn upon you that it's Jim. "Oh, it's you, is it?" he says, recognizing you at the same moment. "Yes," you answer, rubbing your eyes. "What's happened?" "Bally tent's blown down, I think," he says. "Where's Bill?" Then you both raise up your voices and shout for "Bill!" and the ground beneath you heaves and rocks, and the muffled voice that you heard before replies from out the ruin. "Get off my head, can't you?" And Bill struggles out, a muddied, trampled wreck, and in an unnecessarily aggressive mood, he being under the evident belief that the whole thing has been done on purpose. In the morning you are all three speechless, owing to having caught severe colds in the night. You also feel very quarrelsome, and you swear at each other in hoarse whispers during the whole of breakfast time. We therefore decided that we would sleep out on fine nights, and hotel it, and in it, and pub it, like respectable folks, when it was wet, or when we felt inclined for a change. Montmorency hailed this compromise with much approval. He does not revel in romantic solitude. Give him something noisy, and if a trifle low, so much the jollier. To look at Montmorency, you would imagine that he was an angel sent upon the earth, for some reason withheld from mankind, in the shape of a small fox terrier. There is a sort of, "Oh, what a wicked world this is, and how I wish I could do something to make it better and nobler," expression about Montmorency that has been known to bring the tears into the eyes of pious old ladies and gentlemen. When first he came to live at my expense, I never thought I should be able to get him to stop long. I used to sit down and look at him, as he sat on the rug and looked up at me, and think, "Oh, that dog will never live. He will be snatched up to the bright skies in a chariot. That is what will happen to him." But when I had paid for about a dozen chickens that he had killed, and had dragged him growling and kicking by the scruff of his neck out of 114 street fights, and had had a dead cat brought round for my inspection by an irate female, who called me a murderer, and had been summoned by the man next door but one, for having a ferocious dog at large, that had kept him pinned up in his own tool-shed, afraid to venture his nose outside the door for over 2 hours on a cold night, and had learned that the gardener, unknown to myself, had won 30 shillings by backing him to kill rats against time. Then I began to think that maybe they'd let him remain on earth for a bit longer after all. To hang about a stable and collect a gang of the most disreputable dogs to be found in the town, and lead them out to march round the slums to fight other disreputable dogs, is Montmorency's idea of life, and so, as I before observed, he gave to the suggestion of inns and pubs and hotels his most emphatic approbation. Having thus settled the sleeping arrangements to the satisfaction of all 4 of us, the only thing left to discuss was what we should take with us. And this we had begun to argue, when Harris said he'd had enough oratory for one night, and proposed that we should go out and have a smile, saying that he had found a place, round by the square, where you could really get a drop of Irish worth drinking. George said he felt thirsty. I never knew George when he didn't, and as I had a presentiment that a little whiskey, warm with a slice of lemon, would do my complaint good, the debate was, by common assent, adjourned to the following night, and the assembly put on its hats and went out. Chapter 3. Arrangements settled. Harris's method of doing work. How the elderly family man puts up a picture. George makes a sensible remark. Delights of early morning bathing. Provisions for getting upset. So on the following evening we again assembled to discuss and arrange our plans. Harris said, "Now the first thing to settle is what to take with us. Now you get a bit of paper and write down, Jay, and you get the grocery catalogue, George, and somebody give me a bit of pencil, and then I'll make out a list." That's Harris all over, so ready to take the burden of everything himself and put it on the backs of other people. He always reminds me of my poor Uncle Podger. You never saw such a commotion up and down a house in all your life as when my Uncle Podger undertook to do a job. A picture would have come home from the frame-makers and be standing in the dining-room, waiting to be put up. And Aunt Podger would ask what was to be done with it, and Uncle Podger would say, "Oh, you leave that to me. Don't you any of you worry yourselves about that. I'll do all that." And then he would take off his coat and begin. He would send the girl out for 6 penn'orth of nails, and then one of the boys after her to tell her what size to get, and from that he would gradually work down and start the whole house. "Now you go and get me my hammer, Will," he would shout, "and you bring me the rule, Tom. And I shall want the step-ladder, and I had better have a kitchen chair, too. And Jim, you run around to Mr. Goggles and tell him Pa's kind regards and hopes his leg's better, and will he lend him his spirit level. And don't you go, Maria, because I shall want somebody to hold me the light. And when the girl comes back, she must go out again for a bit of picture cord. And Tom, where's Tom? Tom, you come here. I shall want you to hand me up the picture." And then he would lift up the picture and drop it, and it would come out of the frame, and he would try to save the glass and cut himself, and then he would spring round the room looking for his handkerchief. He could not find his handkerchief because it was in the pocket of the coat he had taken off, and he did not know where he had put the coat, and all the house had to leave off looking for his tools and start looking for his coat, while he would dance round and hinder them. "Doesn't anybody in the whole house know where my coat is? I never came across such a set in all my life. Upon my word I didn't. 6 of you, and you can't find a coat that I put down not 5 minutes ago. Well, of all the—" Then he'd get up and find that he'd been sitting on it, and would call out, "Oh, you can give it up. I've found it myself now. Might just as well ask the cat to find anything as expect you people to find it." And when half an hour had been spent in tying up his finger, and a new glass had been got, and the tools and the ladder and the chair and the candle had been brought, he would have another go. The whole family, including the girl and the charwoman, standing round in a semicircle ready to help. 2 people would have to hold the chair, and a third would help him up on it and hold him there, and a fourth would hand him a nail, and a fifth would pass him up the hammer, and he would take hold of the nail and drop it. "There," he would say in an injured tone, "now the nail's gone." and we would all have to go down on our knees and grovel for it, while he would stand up on the chair and grunt, and want to know if he was to be kept there all the evening. The nail would be found at last, but by that time he would have lost the hammer. "Where's the hammer? What did I do with the hammer? Great heavens! 7 of you gaping round there, and you don't know what I did with the hammer!" We would find the hammer for him, and then he would have lost sight of the mark he had made on the wall, where the nail was to go in, and each of us had to get up on the chair beside him and see if we could find it. And we would each discover it in a different place, and he would call us all fools one after another, and tell us to get down. And he would take the rule and remeasure, and find that he wanted half 21 3/8 inch from the corner, and would try to do it in his head, and go mad. And we would all try to do it in our heads, and all arrive at different results and sneer at one another. And in the general row, the original number would be forgotten, and Uncle Podger would have to measure it again. He would use a bit of string this time, and at the critical moment, when the old fool was leaning over the chair at an angle of 45, and trying to reach a point 3 inches beyond what was possible for him to reach, the string would slip, and down he would slide onto the piano, a really fine musical effect being produced by the suddenness with which his body and head struck all the notes at the same time. And Aunt Maria would say that she would not allow the children to stand round and hear such language. At last, Uncle Podger would get the spot fixed again, and put the point of the nail on it with his left hand, and take the hammer in his right hand, and with the first blow he would smack his thumb, and drop the hammer with a yell on somebody's toes. Aunt Maria would mildly observe that, next time Uncle Podger was going to hammer a nail into the wall, she hoped he'd let her know in time, so that she could make arrangements to go and spend a week with her mother while it was being done. "Oh, you women, you make such a fuss over everything," Uncle Podger would reply, picking himself up. "Why, I like doing a little job of this sort." And then he would have another try, and at the second blow the nail would go clean through the plaster, and half the hammer after it, and Uncle Podger be precipitated against the wall with force nearly sufficient to flatten his nose. Then we had to find the rule and the string again, and a new hole was made, and about midnight the picture would be up, very crooked and insecure, the wall for yards round looking as if it had been smoothed down with a rake, and everybody dead beat and wretched, except Uncle Podger. "There you are," he would say, stepping heavily off the chair onto the charwoman's corns, and surveying the mess he had made with evident pride. "Why, some people would have had a man in to do a little thing like that." Harris will be just that sort of man when he grows up, I know, and I told him so. I said I could not permit him to take so much labor upon himself. I said, "No, you get the paper and the pencil and the catalogue, and George write down, and I'll do the work." The first list we made out had to be discarded. It was clear that the upper reaches of the Thames would not allow of the navigation of a boat sufficiently large to take the things we had set down as indispensable. So we tore the list up and looked at each other. George said, "You know, we're on a wrong track altogether. We must not think of the things we could do with, but only of the things that we cannot do without." George comes out really quite sensible at times. You'd be surprised. I call that downright wisdom, not merely as regards the present case, but with reference to our trip up the river of life generally. How many people on that voyage load up the boat till it is ever in danger of swamping with a store of foolish things which they think essential to the pleasure and comfort of the trip, but which are really only useless lumber? How they pile the poor little craft mast high with fine clothes and big houses, with useless servants and a host of swell friends that do not care twopence for them, and that they do not care 3 ha'pence for, with expensive entertainments that nobody enjoys, with formalities and fashions, with pretense and ostentation, and with, oh, heaviest, maddest lumber of all, the dread of what will my neighbour think, with luxuries that only cloy, with pleasures that bore, with empty show that, like the criminal's iron crown of yore, makes to bleed and swoon the aching head that wears it. It is all lumber, man, all lumber. Throw it overboard. It makes the boat so heavy to pull, you nearly faint at the oars. It makes it so cumbersome and dangerous to manage, you never know a moment's freedom from anxiety and care, never gain a moment's rest for dreamy laziness, no time to watch the windy shadows skimming lightly o'er the shallows, or the glittering sunbeams flitting in and out among the ripples, or the great trees by the margin looking down at their own image, or the woods all green and golden, or the lilies white and orange, or the somber waving rushes, or the sedges, or the orcas, or the blue forget-me-nots. Throw the lumber over, man. Let your boat of life be light, packed with only what you need, a homely home and simple pleasures, one or two friends worth the name, someone to love and someone to love you, a cat, a dog, and a pipe or two, enough to eat and enough to wear, and a little more than enough to drink, for thirst is a dangerous thing. You will find the boat easier to pull then, and it will not be so liable to upset. And it will not matter so much if it does upset. Good plain merchandise will stand water. You will have time to think as well as to work, time to drink in life's sunshine, time to listen to the aeolian music that the wind of God draws from the heartstrings around us, time to— I beg your pardon, really, I quite forgot. Well, we left the list to George, and he began it. "We won't take a tent," suggested George. "We will have a boat with a cover. It is ever so much simpler and more comfortable." It seemed a good thought, and we adopted it. I do not know whether you have ever seen the thing I mean. You fix iron hoops up over the boat, and stretch a huge canvas over them, and fasten it down all round, from stem to stern, and it converts the boat into a sort of little house, and it is beautifully cozy, though a trifle stuffy, but there, everything has its drawbacks, as the man said when his mother-in-law died and they came down upon him for the funeral expenses. George said that in that case we must take a rug each, a lamp, some soap, a brush and comb between us, a toothbrush each, a basin, some tooth powder, some shaving tackle, sounds like a French exercise, doesn't it? And a couple of big towels for bathing. I notice that people always make gigantic arrangements for bathing when they are going anywhere near the water, but they don't bathe much when they are there. It is the same when you go to the seaside. I always determine when thinking over the matter in London that I'll get up early every morning and go and have a dip before breakfast, and I religiously pack up a pair of drawers and a bath towel. I always get red bathing drawers. I rather fancy myself in red drawers. They suit my complexion so. But when I get to the sea, I don't feel somehow that I want that early morning bathe nearly so much as I did when I was in town. On the contrary, I feel more that I want to stop in bed till the last moment, and then come down and have my breakfast. Once or twice virtue has triumphed, and I have got out at 6 and half dressed myself, and have taken my drawers and towel, and stumbled dismally off, but I haven't enjoyed it. They seem to keep a specially cutting east wind waiting for me when I go to bathe in the early morning, and they pick out all the 3-cornered stones and put them on top, and they sharpened up the stones and covered the points over with a bit of sand so that I can't see them, and they take the sea and put it 2 miles out, so that I have to huddle myself up in my arms and hop shivering through 6 inches of water, and when I do get to the sea it is rough and quite insulting. One huge wave catches me up and chucks me in a sitting posture, as hard as ever it can, down onto a rock which has been put there for me, and before I've said, "Oh, ugh!" and found out what has gone, the wave comes back and carries me out to mid-ocean. I begin to strike out frantically for the shore, and wonder if I shall ever see home and friends again, and wish I'd been kinder to my little sister when I was a boy, I mean. But when I have given up all hope, a wave retires and leaves me sprawling like a starfish on the sand, and I get up and look back and find that I've been swimming for my life in 2 feet of water. I hop back and dress and crawl home, where I have to pretend I liked it. In the present instance, we all talked as if we were going to have a long swim every morning. George said it was so pleasant to wake up in the boat in the fresh morning and plunge into the limpid river. Harris said there was nothing like a swim before breakfast to give you an appetite. He said it always gave him an appetite. George said that if it was going to make Harris eat more than Harris ordinarily ate, then he would protest against Harris having a bath at all. He said there would be quite enough hard work in towing sufficient food for Harris up against stream as it was. I urged upon George, however, how much pleasanter it would be to have Harris clean and fresh about the boat, even if we did have to take a few more hundredweight of provisions, and he got to see it in my light, and withdrew his opposition to Harris's bath. Agreed finally that we should take 3 bath towels, so as not to keep each other waiting. For clothes, George said 2 suits of flannel would be sufficient, as we could wash them ourselves in the river when they got dirty. We asked him if he had ever tried washing flannels in the river, and he replied, no, not exactly himself like, but he knew some fellows who had, and it was easy enough, and Harris and I were weak enough to fancy he knew what he was talking about, and that 3 respectable young men, without positions or influence, and with no experience in washing, could really clean their own shirts and trousers in the River Thames with a bit of soap. We were to learn in the days to come, when it was too late, that George was a miserable impostor, who would evidently have known nothing whatever about the matter. If you had seen these clothes after, but as the shilling-chalkers say, we anticipate. George impressed upon us to take a change of underthings and plenty of socks, in case we got upset and wanted a change. Also plenty of handkerchiefs, as they would do to wipe things, and a pair of leather boots, as well as our boating shoes, as we should want them if we got upset. End of chapter 3.